A struggling single mom walked into a garage with a broken wheelchair. But what this mechanic fixed in her daughter's life was far bigger than anyone imagined. Like, share and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started, because you won't want to miss the ending. In a quiet corner of Texas, a modest garage sat at the edge of town, its faded sign swaying in the breeze. Inside, Michael Carter, a 32-year-old mechanic, worked with the steady rhythm of a man who found comfort in the hum of engines. His days were predictable, repairing trucks that had carried too many loads, patching up cars worn down by dusty country roads, or bringing life back to motorcycles owned by restless teenagers. He lived simply, never asking for much, and his customers respected him not only for his skill, but also for his kindness and honesty. On a particularly cold morning, Michael stood at his workbench, tightening bolts and humming to himself. He was used to the smell of oil and the clatter of tools, but that day the sound of hesitant footsteps and the squeak of wheels caught his attention. He turned and saw a woman entering his garage, her tired face etched with worry. Behind her, a little girl sat in a wheelchair, bundled in a coat, her bright blue eyes peeking out with quiet hope. The sight was unlike anything Michael had expected. The woman was Laura Collins, 35 years old and clearly exhausted. Strands of hair had slipped from her bun, her hands trembling as she guided the broken wheelchair forward. She worked as a waitress at a local diner, pulling double shifts just to pay rent and keep food on the table. Life had been harsh, and every line on her face told the story of struggles endured. Yet even in her fatigue, she carried a determination that only a mother could have, the strength to keep going for her child's sake. Seated in the chair was Emma, Laura's 9-year-old daughter. Despite her struggles, Emma radiated a light that softened the room. Her wheelchair had become her lifeline since birth, but recently it had broken down completely. The motor no longer worked, the wheels jammed, and the seat creaked under her small frame. Without it, Emma had been unable to go to school, leaving her isolated from her friends. Yet even as her mother pleaded for help, Emma smiled at Michael with a bravery far beyond her years. Laura's voice shook as she explained their situation. "The chair just stopped working last week. I've tried everywhere, but the repairs cost more than I make in a month. I didn't know who else to turn to." She paused, swallowing hard as tears threatened to spill. "You're our last hope. If you can't fix it, I don't know what we'll do." Michael set down his wrench and walked closer, his gaze moving from the exhausted mother to the hopeful little girl who sat quietly, waiting for an answer. Michael crouched beside the wheelchair and studied its worn frame. The damage was obvious. The motor was burnt out, wires frayed, and the wheels were stiff from overuse. It wasn't the kind of repair he normally handled, but something inside him stirred. He glanced up at Emma, whose eyes glimmered with unspoken trust. Her voice was soft, but filled with courage. "It makes a monster sound when I try to move it," she said, giggling faintly. The mechanic smiled at her attempt to lighten the moment. For a brief moment, Michael hesitated. He had no training in medical equipment, and the responsibility weighed heavy. But then he looked at Laura's trembling hands, at Emma's innocent face, and he knew his decision. "Don't worry, kiddo," he said firmly. "I'll take care of this." Laura gasped softly, her relief visible in the tears that finally fell. Emma grinned, her cheeks glowing as though the promise alone had already lifted her spirits. Michael stood, determination in his eyes, ready to take on a challenge he had never faced before. The garage grew quiet after they left, but Michael's mind replayed the encounter. He could still see Emma's smile, and Laura's desperate hope weighed on him. This wasn't just about repairing a chair. It was about giving a child her independence back, restoring dignity to a mother who had carried too much alone, and proving that kindness could make miracles. He looked around his cluttered garage, boxes of spare parts, forgotten tools, and scrap metal scattered everywhere. Somewhere in this mess, he believed, were the pieces needed to rebuild Emma's wheelchair. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael pulled the wheelchair onto his workbench. He examined every detail with the precision of a surgeon. The motor was beyond saving, but he remembered an old electric cart he had stored in the back. With some adjustments, its motor could work. The wheels were stiff, but he had bearings from a discarded bike that might fit. Piece by piece, he sketched a plan in his mind, his hands already moving to gather what he needed. This was no longer just work. It was a mission. Hours passed as Michael tinkered in the glow of a single hanging light. His hands were steady, though fatigue tugged at his body. He replaced wires carefully, checked circuits twice, and cleaned every joint until the chair began to resemble something functional again. At one point, he paused to paint the frame. He chose sky blue, remembering how Laura had mentioned it was Emma's favorite color. As the fresh paint dried, Michael smiled faintly, imagining the little girl's reaction. For the first time in years, he felt like his work carried a deeper meaning. By midnight, the garage was silent, except for the hum of Michael's tools. He wiped sweat from his forehead and leaned back, staring at the nearly finished chair. It wasn't perfect, but it was sturdy, safe, and far better than the broken shell it had been. He imagined Emma rolling through her school halls, laughing with friends, and Laura watching with pride instead of worry. The thought filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that sometimes the most important repairs weren't found in engines, but in lives. Finally, as the clock ticked past 1 in the morning, Michael set down his tools and stretched. The repaired wheelchair stood in front of him, gleaming under the dim light. His hands were sore, his clothes stained, but his heart was light. He couldn't wait to see Emma's face when she tried it. With a final glance, he whispered to himself, "She's going to love it." Then, locking up the garage, he headed home, unaware that this small act of kindness would ripple far beyond what he imagined. His journey had only just begun. The following morning, the Texas sun rose slowly, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets. Michael stood in his garage, brushing the last bit of dust from the newly restored wheelchair. It gleamed in the soft light, the sky-blue paint shining as though it had always belonged to Emma. He had stayed awake far later than he should have, but his tired eyes sparkled with anticipation. Today was the day he would return something precious to a little girl whose spirit deserved to soar. He knew it was more than just a chair. It was her freedom. Laura arrived with Emma shortly after sunrise. Her steps were hesitant, and her tired face carried the memory of sleepless nights spent worrying. Emma sat quietly in the old borrowed chair, its creaks echoing with every push her mother gave. Despite the strain, Emma's smile had not faded. She carried with her a childlike hope that somehow Michael had worked a miracle. As they entered the garage, the scent of fresh paint and the sight of Michael's proud grin filled the space, sparking anticipation in both mother and daughter. Michael gently pushed the repaired wheelchair forward, and for a moment silence filled the room. Laura gasped, her hand covering her mouth as she took in the transformation. The chair looked brand new, with polished wheels, a sturdy motor, and a soft padded seat. The sky-blue color shimmered in the light, reflecting Emma's favorite shade. Emma's eyes widened, her small hands reaching out as though afraid it was a dream. "Is that mine?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Michael knelt down and nodded. "Yes, Emma, this is yours." Emma climbed into the chair with Michael's help, her laughter echoing as the motor purred to life. Slowly, she pushed the joystick forward, and the chair rolled smoothly across the garage floor. She squealed with joy, spinning in circles, her giggles filling the air like music. For the first time in weeks, she felt weightless, free from the frustration of being trapped in a broken shell. Laura wiped her tears, watching her daughter's happiness unfold. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You didn't just fix her chair, you gave her life back." Michael stood back, his heart swelling as he watched Emma race across the garage. She moved faster, braver, her laughter bursting louder with every turn. Laura clutched her hands together, overwhelmed by the sight of her child reclaiming her independence. In that moment, Michael realized that what he had done reached far beyond bolts and wires. He had restored more than mobility. He had given a family hope. The burden Laura carried seemed lighter, and the sparkle in Emma's eyes was proof that kindness could change everything. The town quickly heard of what Michael had done. Word spread from the diner where Laura worked to neighbors who had seen Emma's struggles. People whispered about the mechanic who had repaired a little girl's wheelchair without charging a cent, using his own spare parts and long hours. Customers began arriving at his garage, not just for repairs, but to thank him, to shake his hand, to leave food or gifts as tokens of gratitude. For Michael, the attention felt strange, but the warmth in their words reminded him he had done something meaningful. Laura couldn't stop expressing her gratitude. She visited Michael later that week with homemade pie, her way of saying thank you when words never felt enough. "I don't know how to repay you," she said softly. "Every night I worried Emma would never get to feel normal again. You gave her back something priceless." Michael shrugged, his modest nature shining through. "All I did was fix a chair," he said. But Laura shook her head. "No, you fixed much more. You gave me hope as a mother, and you gave Emma a chance to smile again." Emma often visited too, rolling into the garage after school just to tell Michael about her day. She shared stories about her classmates, about how she could now join them in games or sit comfortably during lessons. Each time, her joy filled the garage like sunlight breaking through clouds. Michael listened with patience, his smile never fading. Though he had once believed his work was ordinary, Emma's visits reminded him that sometimes the smallest repairs carried the heaviest weight. Every laugh from Emma was proof that his late-night effort had been worth it. Michael's garage became more than a workshop. It turned into a place of hope. Parents from around town began asking him to look at old wheelchairs, scooters, or mobility aids their families could not afford to replace. Michael never turned them away. Though it wasn't profitable, it gave his work purpose in a way that no car or truck ever had. Each repair reminded him of Emma, spinning in circles with her sky-blue chair. He realized he wasn't just a mechanic. He was someone who could make lives a little easier, one small act at a time. One evening, as Michael closed up the garage, he saw Laura and Emma waiting outside. Emma zipped forward, her chair humming smoothly, and handed him a small drawing. It showed a smiling stick-figure mechanic beside a blue wheelchair with the words "My Hero" written in crooked letters. Michael felt a lump rise in his throat as he unfolded the paper. For a man who had never considered himself extraordinary, that simple drawing meant more than any payment ever could. He carefully pinned it to the wall of his garage, a daily reminder of why he did what he did. Laura spoke quietly while Emma played nearby. "You might not realize it, Michael, but you changed us. Before that day, I felt like I was drowning. I didn't know how I'd keep going. But now, I believe again. Emma believes again. You gave us more than kindness. You gave us strength." Michael lowered his gaze, humbled by her words. He had never imagined his life would intersect with theirs so deeply. But in that moment, he realized that true worth wasn't measured in money or reputation, but in the impact one left on others. Weeks turned into months, but the bond between them only grew stronger. Michael continued to help Laura whenever he could, repairing her old car when it broke down or stopping by the diner to eat and check in. Emma became a regular presence in his garage, her laughter brightening even the toughest days. The once lonely mechanic now found his life intertwined with theirs, and though he never asked for recognition, he carried a quiet pride in knowing he had repaired more than a wheelchair. He had repaired hearts, and that was something no machine could replace. Late one night, as Michael sat in his quiet garage, he reflected on how a simple act had rippled into something bigger than he ever imagined. He looked around at the tools, the grease-stained floor, the countless repairs he had done, but his eyes lingered on Emma's drawing pinned to the wall. He realized that while engines came and went, lives touched by kindness endured forever. That was the greatest repair he had ever made. He whispered to himself, "Sometimes it's not the machines we're meant to fix, it's each other." And with that, he turned out the lights, smiling. The days turned into weeks, and each passing moment revealed how much Emma had changed since the wheelchair repair. At first, she was simply excited to roll into school without needing constant help. But soon her confidence blossomed into something far greater. Teachers noticed her participation in class increasing, and her laughter returned to the playground where she once sat, watching others play. For Laura, seeing her daughter regain not just her mobility but also her spark for life was nothing short of a miracle. She often thought back to Michael's garage, where kindness had reshaped both of their lives. Michael, meanwhile, had begun to look forward to Emma's visits as much as he looked forward to fixing cars. She would burst into the garage with stories about her day, her voice carrying an energy that filled the dusty space with warmth. Sometimes she'd bring little sketches of cars, wheels and engines, proudly showing them off. One afternoon, she shyly admitted to Michael that she wanted to be an engineer someday. The way her eyes glowed when she said it made Michael realize his influence stretched far beyond the garage. He had become part of her dreams. Michael studied her sketchbook carefully, his rough hands flipping through the pages filled with imagination. He was struck by the detail, a little girl's perspective of mechanics, full of creativity and curiosity. "These are amazing, Emma," he told her softly. "You have a real gift." Emma blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Do you think I could really become an engineer?" she asked. Michael crouched down to her level, his eyes gentle. "I don't just think you can, I know you can. You've got more determination than anyone I've ever met." His words lit up her face. The bond between them grew deeper. Laura often watched quietly from the side, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew her daughter's confidence came not only from her repaired wheelchair, but from the faith Michael had placed in her. It wasn't something money could buy. It was something rare, something deeply human. Each time Emma smiled up at Michael, Laura silently thanked the universe for placing this man in their lives. She had walked into his garage once feeling desperate and hopeless, but she had walked out with more than she could ever have imagined. The town began to notice the changes too. People whispered about the little girl who had found her spark again, thanks to a mechanic who cared more about people than profits. At the diner, customers spoke about Michael as if he were a hero. Farmers, shopkeepers, and families who had once struggled with broken equipment now found themselves turning to him, not just because of his skill, but because of his kindness. His garage, once just another stop on a quiet street, had transformed into a symbol of community, a place where problems were met with patience and compassion. Michael never sought the attention, but he couldn't deny that the gratitude warmed his heart. Sometimes strangers would leave pies, thank you notes, or even small donations at his shop. One morning, he found a card taped to his door with the words, "For fixing more than machines." He pinned it beside Emma's drawing, where he kept reminders of why he worked late nights and never turned anyone away. For him, the real reward wasn't recognition, it was watching lives, like Emma's, become brighter because of something as simple as a repaired chair. Emma continued to visit often, her wheelchair humming smoothly as she rolled across the garage floor. She loved sitting beside Michael as he worked, peppering him with questions about how engines functioned or why certain tools were shaped the way they were. Michael answered each one with patience, happy to see her curiosity grow. He even began teaching her small tasks, like tightening bolts or identifying parts. Every time she managed to help, she would beam with pride. Slowly, the garage became more than just Michael's workplace. It became a classroom for Emma, a space where her dreams were nurtured. One day after school, Emma brought a special project. She had drawn a detailed design of a car powered by clean energy, explaining how she wanted to build something that could help people and protect the planet. Her words spilled out with excitement, her hands waving in the air as she explained each detail. Michael listened, captivated. He had never thought much about the future of engineering or innovation, but hearing Emma talk filled him with hope. It wasn't just about repairing lives anymore. It was about inspiring the next generation to dream even bigger. Laura often joined in these moments, smiling as she watched her daughter's creativity bloom. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The crushing weight of raising a disabled child alone had once left her exhausted and hopeless, but now each day carried a lightness. Michael's presence had given her strength, and Emma's renewed spirit gave her courage to keep going. Sometimes she caught herself looking at Michael with more than gratitude in her heart, an unspoken bond that had quietly grown between them, built on kindness, trust, and shared love for Emma's happiness. The town's admiration for Michael only deepened when stories of his generosity spread beyond their borders. A local newspaper even wrote a feature about him, calling him the mechanic with a heart. Though he chuckled awkwardly at the headline, the truth was clear. His garage had become a lifeline for many. Yet when asked about it, Michael always deflected the praise. "I didn't do anything special," he'd say. "I just fixed a chair." But everyone who knew the story understood it was more than that. He had repaired hope, and in doing so he had repaired a future. One autumn afternoon, Emma surprised Michael with a hug so tight it nearly knocked him over. "You didn't just fix my wheelchair," she said with tears in her eyes. "You fixed my dreams." The words struck him deeply, echoing in his mind long after she left. He realized in that moment that the truest repairs weren't made with tools or machines. They were made with care, patience, and the willingness to see people for who they were, not for what they lacked. That hug became the greatest payment he had ever received, and one he would never forget. As months passed, Emma's progress continued. She joined a science club at school, where her ideas about engines and design amazed her teachers. She even won a small award for creativity, which she proudly brought to Michael. "This is yours too," she told him, placing the ribbon in his hand. Michael shook his head, but his eyes glistened with pride. "No, Emma, that's all you. You earned it." Yet in his heart he knew the truth. Her success was theirs to share, born from a moment of kindness that had grown into a lifetime of possibility. Michael's garage became a second home for Emma and Laura. They celebrated small victories there. Emma's first award, Laura's promotion at the diner, birthdays marked with cupcakes and laughter. The once lonely workshop now rang with joy. And Michael realized that his life had changed just as much as theirs. He had started as a mechanic, fixing broken things, but through this journey, he had found something more profound. He had discovered family, belonging, and a purpose deeper than turning wrenches. And for the first time in years, he felt complete. On a quiet evening, Michael sat in his garage, surrounded by the hum of silence. The drawing Emma had given him and the thank-you notes from neighbors still decorated the walls. He thought about how a single act, choosing to help without expecting anything in return, had altered the course of 3 lives. Looking back, he realized it wasn't chance that brought Laura and Emma to his garage that morning. It was destiny, guiding him toward the people he was meant to help and love. And with a contented sigh, Michael whispered, "Some repairs last forever."